Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Lead to Cash, Process Improvements, Leveraging Salesforce. My name is Sarah, and I will be your technical moderator today. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. You have entered this webinar in listen-only mode. That simply means that you are muted, so we don't pick up any noise from your end. We do welcome and encourage you to submit your text questions via the questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. You can enter your questions at any time, and we will save them for a Q&A at the end of today's presentation. If we do not get to all of the questions, we will do our best to follow up with you offline. Also, if you have any technical difficulties or questions, please type them into that same questions pane, and I will work with you directly to resolve those as soon as possible. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive a follow-up email that will include the recording along with a PDF of the slides. By submitting your questions today, you agree to have them read aloud and recorded. All right, thank you again for joining us today. I would now like to turn things over to your presenter, Jim Safransky. Welcome, Jim. You now have the floor.
All right, thanks, Sarah. And good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our Lead to Cash webinar, leveraging Salesforce applications. And very briefly, just by way of introduction, I'm Director of Sales for our Salesforce practice at Vertex. Vertex is a certified Salesforce implementation partner and independent software vendor partner with Salesforce. Very quickly, 10 plus years of actual Salesforce experience, about 30 years of CRM experience. I hold 3 Salesforce certifications. My background is engineering, marketing, and finance, and I've held a number of corporate positions as well as sales and service positions for a number of large software companies. Now, we presented or promoted this webinar as educational in nature because our time frame is so limited. So I'm guessing we're going to take 3 days of content and put it into a 30-minute time slot, leaving hopefully enough time to answer some specific questions. So let's get started. We'll start with an overview of this lead to cash process. Several people may have slightly different definitions of that process. We'll take a look at some of the components or sub-processes, some of the challenges that you're facing on a typical daily basis. We know this because we talk to dozens of companies, customers, and prospective customers on a weekly basis. I'll share with you the research conclusion that I arrived at in preparing for today's webinar. Then we'll take a look at some of the Salesforce functional components. Then, what might a future state leveraging more of this Salesforce functionality, what might that future state look like? Then some high-level benefits. We'll wrap it up and then move on to Q&A. Now, my objective, my unwritten objective here today is to have you say one or more times throughout the presentation, I didn't know we had that. Or better yet, we can use that. So let's start at the beginning. Salesforce in 1999 started as a CRM a CRM provider, a customer relationship management provider. After running its sales cloud for a number of years, it developed a service cloud platform. Throughout the years, has made a number of acquisitions. So it truly has become a platform. So when I say sales cloud or service cloud or marketing cloud, for example, I define those as a Salesforce application. Many of you probably already have Salesforce implemented or perhaps are planning to implement Salesforce. So I appreciate your interest in today's topic. Let me tell you I'll try to boil down the potential of Salesforce as a platform. Several years ago, while working at Salesforce, the CIO of Caterpillar Tractor got up on stage at a Dreamforce event. Caterpillar had just made a significant investment in Salesforce licenses and services. And he got up and introduced himself, and with that little background, he said, globally, we have over 300 legacy applications, over 300. But we have a global instance of SAP, our Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP application. He said, we've invested in Salesforce to reduce that number of legacy applications from 300 plus down to 2. In other words, Salesforce will handle everything on the front end, anything related to customers, prospects, and so on. SAP will handle everything on the, quote, back end, end quote. So here's a simplistic pictorial of a typical lead-to-cash business process today. Now, while it doesn't show the myriad of manual methods, spreadsheets, emails used throughout the process, I've tried to simplistically capture some of the time delays that Salesforce functionality can impact and possibly even eliminate as a result of leveraging that functionality. Now, while this may not represent your exact lead-to-cash process, if anything, you've got even more steps. Obviously, we'd welcome the challenge to have a discussion about your challenges, your needs, and we can talk about that at a later time. So, a variety of challenges, and the real challenge is how to improve your existing processes, grow revenues without adding resources or those manual spreadsheets. So here's just a few that that we think are actually represent some of the low-hanging fruit in leveraging Salesforce to optimize your lead-to-cash processes. First of all, building a qualified sales pipeline. I say qualified because many people will leverage their web-to-lead, Salesforce web-to-lead functionality from their website, but without asking some specific questions. It's just a name, it's an email, maybe it's a phone number, etc. And there's no way to qualify it or determine its viability. Other people, of course, use marketing campaigns. They purchase lists, import those into Salesforce's leads. And in one example, I've got a customer who about 6 weeks ago said, Jim, we now have over 33,000 leads. What do we do with them? This has been a result of their purchasing lists. So they're spending money on the lists, they're bringing them into Salesforce, and they don't have the manpower to tackle 33,000 potential leads. Every sales organization loves opportunities, but in my personal experience, I'd say 95+% of the people I run into capture only a revenue amount with opportunities. No specific product or services, details. And again, we're somewhat talking about demand planning here, so more on that in a bit. Discounting. I'll show you an example of what we've done for a customer. Salesforce out of the box does not provide some specific discounting information. It can be configured, of course, but we typically configure line item discount information, gross margin on a line item basis, and if those discounts exceed some customer defined threshold, we kick off a workflow for automating that approval process. Next, just quoting, contracts, orders, too many manual steps. Some people we know use a third-party quoting system, and they just can't quite lean over the fence anymore to allow Salesforce to handle that quoting inherently. Then, once an opportunity is closed, how do you generate and process an actual order for that order entry system or ERP system. Finally, in this whole lead to cash process, customer service typically is involved, and if they don't have the visibility into all of these aspects, customer satisfaction, of course, takes a hit. So here's the most complex slide thus far. In researching some of the cost-benefit analyses of leveraging Salesforce for improving this lead-to-cash process, effectively what happens without an integrated, seamless system, even if revenues are climbing, sales, general, and administrative costs also tend to rise. So revenues are great, gross margins are horrible. So one of those challenges was had to do with opportunity limitations. In most cases, capturing opportunity amounts or revenues is what most people use. Because of that, if there's no idea of what comprises or how the salesperson or customer service person arrived at that amount, we have no visibility. So tracking revenues is great from a quota achievement standpoint, a target achievement standpoint, but for people in operations and production, they don't have the visibility that they all would like. Again, manager approvals tend to be slow and highly manual. And finally, where is this business coming from? If the revenue projections are great, that's wonderful. But for the folks in operations and production or procurement to buy materials, or for HR to actually hire resources for services organizations, that's the kind of visibility that out-of-the-box opportunities do not provide. So here's a simple screenshot for a customer. We used standard out-of-the-box Sales Cloud products and price books. I highlighted a few of the components on this page, and there will not be a test afterwards. But starting with the price books, people generally have a number of different price books. They're based on maybe previous business. They're based on promotions. They're based on contracts. They're based on geography. Salesforce allows you to create an unlimited number of price books to use. So here's a case. Here's an opportunity that is now consists of 2 line items. We have a product name, a product family. We show a discount, and without leveraging this standard functionality, what most salespeople will have to do to try to hit a number is they'll say, well, I'm just going to discount everything, 5%. Well, maybe it doesn't make sense to discount every line item 5%. This gives you the granularity you need to make good sales decisions and for manager approvals as well. And in terms of, quote automation and accelerating this whole process, here again, a standard Sales Cloud quoting screen. A PDF quote can be automatically generated, emailed, and obviously tracked in Salesforce real time. So accelerating that entire process without errors or delays. Add to that, for example, DocuSign, a Salesforce App Exchange offering. We've got an ability to just further accelerate that entire process. Let me give you an example of how how I used Salesforce several years back. We had a large home improvement retailer who had a sales group that went out and called on homeowners for door replacement, window replacement, and so on and so on and so forth. While they were a Salesforce customer at the time, these 200 plus salespeople would make appointments to go and visit homeowners. They would take with them a clipboard of forms and papers and detail sheets for taking measurements and so on. A sales call could possibly be a couple of hours. They would, depending upon the state, the county, the city, perhaps, there were different legal forms to have these homeowners sign. And they would, if they made the sale, they would come back with a clipboard of as many as 30 paper pages. They would get home, run into the door, have dinner, and have to fax 30 pages for each closed sale to their order entry people. Long story short, we implemented Salesforce integrated with their window quoting system. We captured all of the signatures needed based upon the customer's address. So legally, we were protected. If there were some issues, some damages around the house, and the salesperson wanted to capture some pre-existing condition, he would take a picture. All of that that process and that faxing and that order entry system would oftentimes take up to 3 days. One of the delays is if one of the pages misfed or double fed through the fax machine, order entry required them to fax the entire 30 pages all over again. Well, we turned 3 days, 2 to 3 days into real-time order entry, and they were people at the home office and operations were able to review the order, place in this case, the Windows order from the manufacturers, and immediately saved errors, time delays, customer sat issues, and on and on and on. So in the example I just provided, that was a typical swivel chair order entry system. They would leave one system, turn their chair, and start rekeying information into their order entry system, obviously taking precious time and, of course, precious cash. The errors are so common and so wildly rampant that we can't quite understand many times why we haven't been able to, convince people that Salesforce can eliminate a lot of these errors and of course the resultant potential customer sat scores. So as far as order management delays are concerned, we can automatically transfer Salesforce orders to customers' ERP or order entry systems, eliminating the rekeying, eliminating the errors, maximizing margins, maximizing customer sat. So because integration with ERP or order entry systems or legacy systems is so critical to this whole lead to cash integration process, here's a slide we typically use in some of our presentations. We've got just a few examples on the left. The number of options in the middle is extensive. These are some of the typical tools we've used. And going back to my example with Caterpillar Tractor, of course, their long-term vision is to have only SAP on the left, Salesforce on the right. So let's talk about the ever-elusive 360-degree visibility. When you have ERP integration, salespeople can always see a real-time view of all account activities. Let me give you an example. When a salesperson goes in to visit an account, using his mobile device, he wants to know several things before walking in there. He wants to know orders to date, possibly even returns. He wants to know shipment status. He wants to know if there are any customer sat issues or cases in the Salesforce vernacular. And last but not least, he wants to know if there are any credit holds. When he walks into that account, he can proactively be on top of all of the information he needs to not only keep that customer happy, but to promote the relationship and obviously generate more revenue. This simple credit hold transaction is something that we have helped people enable. No sense that customer, that salesperson walking into that account if 2 days ago they were put on credit hold and son of a gun, no one told them. Finally, if there is an open case, or if there have been several cases, hopefully they were closed quickly. Just all the more detail. This is what we mean by a 360-degree view of the customer. So here's the first eye chart. I've talked about just addressing several of the challenges that we run into with customers, again, or prospective customers on a day in, day out basis. So starting with the challenges on the left, you'll probably recognize a number of the Salesforce solutions, the applications, sometimes the objects or pages that we leverage to address that challenge. There on the right-hand side, I've added some benefits. And in some of the cases, I've actually included some percentage improvement. These percentage improvements have actually come directly from Salesforce customers. So every 1 to 2 years, Salesforce contracts with a third-party survey company. They throw pages and pages of questions at them, and they report their, quote, average percentage improvement. When we help people develop a business case, because some of these numbers look awfully suspicious, we will generally tell them to cut those numbers in half, and still the business case can be extremely powerful. You know, one of the things I talked about a moment ago was this customer satisfaction. Let me give you a practical example of the cost of customer satisfaction. Last December, my wife and I went to Walt Disney World, and we stayed at one of the resort hotels. We had 4 nights booked, but because of the noise coming from the next room that could not be contained by hotel security, we checked out 2 days early. So I was refunded 2 days of stay. Within 2 weeks, I received a letter saying, here's a $500 gift certificate for your next stay, and here's a 3-day free stay at any resort hotel. So that customer satisfaction issue was solved by throwing about $3,000 at the problem. Kudos to Walt Disney World, but customer satisfaction leads to revenue or revenue loss. So leveraging Salesforce, what might a possible future state lead to cash business process look like? Well, again, many of the same components. We typically can't control things like shipping and transportation and how long it takes a customer to receive goods, for example. But I tried to highlight the reduction in the number of little process delays by the analog clock there. So this is something that we think every Salesforce customer or every prospective Salesforce customer should create a strategy around. Fewer manual steps, fewer spreadsheets, fewer emails, fewer resources. Let them go sell instead of dealing with manual intervention. All of that intended to reduce errors and optimize the process. And again, everything's in Salesforce, so it's all accessible via smartphone, tablet, and when they walk into that customer, they're ready to engage. So what might the lead to cash process improvement leveraging Salesforce, what might that look like? Again, we can't control inventory levels or manufacturing cycles, but ignoring that and ignoring things like transportation, etc. Here's the process improvement benefit that you might be capable of achieving, and this will resonate throughout the halls of any sales marketing organization, including accounts receivable. So, in summary, hopefully I've conveyed the message that Salesforce functionality can significantly optimize your processes. In many cases, it just will eliminate some manual processes. More importantly, the Salesforce implementation strategy can be tailored to your challenges and needs. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say you've got a marketing organization that's just firing on all cylinders. You've got lead scoring and you're filling up your pipeline. Well, that's great. Every strategy has to have some tactical components. So while at the front end, you're absolutely in great shape, you might have not implemented products and price books. You may not have enabled automatic quoting. You may not have automatically transferred orders using that standard orders object. So you can take a laser scope to any of those steps along the entire process and go after those processes that are absolutely creating the most challenges for you, maybe the most delays, maybe the most manual intervention. Obviously, we'd love to help you develop such a strategy, and hoping there's some interest. Here's my specific contact information. I'll leave this up on the screen for just a moment, and hopefully we've got some questions coming in. All right, I do see a few questions. Excuse me, let me expand this window. First question, how do you score leads? Well, I mentioned Salesforce's web to lead functionality. And one of the first things I will do when I'm introduced to a new customer is I'll go check their website. I'll learn more about the company and try to understand how they're organized, their scope of products, services, geography, and so on. But then I'll always click on the Contact Us button. And in many cases, I see 4 or 5 fields, name, title, company, email, and phone. Sometimes it goes beyond that, of course, the area of interest and so on. But they're typically they typically lack several key questions like, what's your time frame? We do run into it occasionally. Sometimes you feel it appropriate to ask what their budget is. Would you like someone to contact you immediately? And on and on and on. So you want to find that fine line between too many questions and boring people to death, but getting enough information so you can give that a score, and the score could be 1 to 10, or it could be simple as hot and cold. So we typically start at the web to lead starting line, and from there we introduce several other questions to try to capture that information. And in other cases, when people buy leads, lead lists, we can create a little algorithm to score those leads as they're being pulled into Salesforce. Let's see, a second question is, can all of this functionality be provided in Salesforce Classic or Lightning? The answer is yes. There are still a few gotchas. For those of you who are still running Classic, you can continue to run Classic for the foreseeable future. For people running Lightning, you may be aware that every 4 months with the next Salesforce release, there is more and more functionality. But the short answer is yes, and we've not found any constraints in implementing some of this functionality at customers over the last couple of years, or since the introduction of Lightning. Can Salesforce forecasts be used with products and price books? Yes. In fact, when you use products and price books, you have the ability to create a lot of specific reports. You've got an opportunity. You've got a product or product categories. You've got a probability of close, and you've got a projected close date. You do the simple math, which is effectively what Salesforce Forecasts does, and yes, you can start to see some validated revenue and product or product category forecasts at any point in time, real time. A lot of data that we need in Salesforce is already in our data warehouse. That's a good question. We're actually getting ready to go live with a large insurance customer on the East Coast, and we went around and around and around. They've got multiple legacy systems. They've got data quality issues between those systems. So again, the elusive single source of truth. In this particular example, we're using Salesforce Connect to bring in data from their SQL Server data warehouse. So yes, we can bring data in from any legacy data store. Depends on the data normalization for those of you who are database experts. But yes, whether we use Salesforce Connect or a standard ETL tool, there should be no limitations whatsoever. Our production buyers and plant management use a pretty sophisticated algorithm for planning. Anything that can be done mathematically can be replicated mathematically in Salesforce. So absolutely. Although it can be done automatically behind the scenes, so no manual intervention whatsoever. Another question is, let me expand this column, my apologies. We already have Salesforce implemented. Can you give me a few reasons why we need help from Vertex? I am not getting that answer from this presentation. Well, thank you. We did not want it to be a sales presentation. We wanted it to be an educational webinar. And if we hit struck a few nerves, I can foresee us talking to one another. We have been implementing Salesforce solutions for 10+ years. We hold a number of partner certifications. We've got certified consultants, typically with 4 to 6 Salesforce certifications, and we've got the experience. What we do this 10 to 12 hours a day. So we'd be happy to give you a few reasons as to how we can help. No cost, no obligation, and ultimately that's your decision. But time is the new currency, and if we can save people time, if we can help their gross margin, the cost of implementation services is quickly forgotten. Currently, the last question: how can I improve the quality of my leads? Well, that's an open-ended one. A couple of thoughts come to mind. Number one, depending upon where the leads are coming from, if they're simply coming from your website, think about asking some more critical questions. Again, walking that fine line. You don't want to scare them away. Some people do not want to use the B word, in other words, budget. So at the very least, get some sort of scoring data that will help you send those leads to either an inside salesperson or a salesperson. If you give that person 10 leads and he or she has no idea which ones might be stronger, sometimes it comes down to a gut check. But that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to via marketing campaigns and go after a more granular marketing group. Maybe you're going after procurement resources, and maybe you can generate some better leads just by asking some specific questions. One might be, how long does it take to become a preferred vendor with your company? If they say 6 months, or if they say we're not accepting any new partners, then they immediately go to the bottom of the list. Lastly, if you're purchasing lists, you may want to talk with the people providing those lists and get some more granular field data from that. Someone wants to talk about Vertex. So to the person who has asked that question, I would be happy to reach out to you. Any more questions, Sarah?
It looks like that's all the questions we have for now.
All right. Well, I'll give it another 30 seconds. I'll ramble a little bit. I wanted to, thank everyone again for your time, for your interest. I'd love to have some one-on-one conversations with you. No harm, no foul. And if you need more examples of how we've done this at other customers, let's set a calendar date and we can talk about it. And Sarah, I guess that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jim, and thank you everyone for attending today. As a reminder, you will get a recording of today's presentation as well as a PDF of the slides. So keep an eye out for that. And this officially concludes today's webcast. Have a great rest of your day.